Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're taking a look at the Sofia offshore wind farm and its connection to the OFTO tender round 12.
OFTO,
What?
that stands for Offshore Transmission Owner.
Ah,
And it's all about how the electricity that's made at these massive wind farms way out at sea actually makes it back to the mainland, to power homes and businesses.
okay, yeah, because it's one thing to have these giant wind turbines out there spinning away, but it's a whole different challenge to get that energy back to shore where we can actually use it.
Absolutely.
We've got a pretty interesting stack of sources for this one.
Yeah.
Attendee lists, presentation slides, and even a Q&A summary from their launch event that they held on February 25th.
That's interesting, yeah.
It's kind of like getting a behind-the-scenes look at how these huge projects actually come together.
It is. And what's really cool about these sources is that we get to see the questions and concerns that potential investors and stakeholders had. It's not just the polished marketing pitch. We're getting a glimpse of the real conversations that are shaping the future of this project.
That's a great point. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is the Sofia offshore wind farm, and what makes it so special?
All right, so picture this. A wind farm located 195 kilometers off the northeast coast of England,
Wow,
right in the middle of Dogger Bank. That's like driving from London to Birmingham.
that's quite a trek.
Yeah, and this thing is huge. It has a capacity of 1.4 gigawatts, which is enough to power something like 1.2 million homes.
That's a whole lot of electricity.
It is a lot, and that's why it comes with a hefty price tag, too. The slides mention an investment exceeding £3 billion.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking. And this is all being developed and owned by RWE, right?
Yeah, that's right. RWE, a global leader in renewable energy. They're a pretty big deal in the UK's energy scene, too. In fact, they operate 10 offshore wind farms in the UK, and 8 of those have already gone through this OFTO process.
Wow, so they're really committed to this whole offshore wind thing.
Oh, yeah. They're all in. They're even planning to invest a whopping $8 billion in green technologies in the UK alone by 2030.
That's a statement. Okay, so we've got these giant wind turbines out there in the North Sea generating all this power. How does it actually get back to the mainland? That's where these OFTOs come in, right?
Exactly. Think of it like building a bridge between the wind farm and the coast. It's a pretty complex system involving both offshore and onshore infrastructure.
So it's not just about laying down a cable.
No, it's much more than that. First, you've got this massive offshore converter platform out at sea.
Wait, hold on, a power plant at sea?
Yeah, pretty much. It basically converts the electricity generated by the wind farm into a form that can be transmitted over such long distances.
That's wild.
Then you need hundreds of kilometers of subsea cables to carry that power back to shore, where it connects to the national grid through an onshore converter station.
So these OFTOs, these bridge builders, they're in charge of building and operating all of that.
Yep, that's the gist of it. And that's what this 10 to round 12 is all about. It's basically a competition to see which private companies will get the rights to own and operate those transmission assets for the Sofia wind farm.
So it's kind of like an auction for the right to be the power line provider for this massive wind farm?
Yeah, you could say that. And it's a pretty big deal considering just how much infrastructure is involved.
And it's all designed to attract private investment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Instead of the government having to foot the bill for all of this, they open it up to private companies who then get to operate the transmission assets for a while, usually around 25 years.
So the government gets the infrastructure it needs without breaking the bank, and the companies get a long-term investment opportunity. It sounds like a win-win.
That's the idea in a nutshell. Of course, there are always challenges and risks involved, and that's what makes these OFTO tenders so interesting to follow.
Okay, so let's walk through how this tender process actually works. What are the main steps, and what are these companies competing for exactly?
Well, the first hurdle is what's called the Enhanced Pre-Qualification, or EPQ.
Sounds serious.
It is. It's basically like a screening process where Ofgem, the regulator, makes sure that only qualified bidders can actually participate.
So they got to prove they can handle the job.
Exactly. You have to show them you've got the financial resources, the technical expertise, and the experience to take on a project of this magnitude.
It's like a job interview for bridge builders.
Oh, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So once you make it past the EPQ, then comes the invitation to tender, or ITT.
Okay, and this is where things really heat up, right?
Right. Now, qualified bidders get all the detailed information about the project, and they have to submit their actual bids.
So they're basically putting a price tag on building and operating this power line to the Sofia wind farm. What kind of things do they have to consider when they're calculating their bid?
Ooh, lots of things. They got to think about the cost of materials construction, operating and maintaining the assets for the next 25 years.
25 years, that's a long time.
It is. And on top of that, they also have to factor in all sorts of risks like equipment failures, extreme weather events, and any changes in regulations. So pretty complex calculation.
Sounds like a high-stakes game. So how do they actually decide who wins? Is it just the lowest bid that gets the contract?
Well, not exactly. It's not just about the price. They're looking for the bidder who offers the best value for money, taking into account both the price and the quality of the proposal.
So it's a combination of being financially savvy and having the technical chops to actually pull it off.
Exactly. And once they've chosen the winning bidder, they do their final due diligence to make sure everything's in order. Then they grant a license to the successful bidder who officially becomes the offshore transmission owner for the Sofia wind farm.
So it's a long road to get there.
Oh, yeah. This tender round 12, which started back in February, is probably going to go on well into 2026.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. And all of this just for the power line for one wind farm.
That's right. And this is just one piece of the puzzle in the UK's plan for offshore wind. They've set a target of generating 50 gigawatts of electricity from offshore wind by 2030.
Wow, that's ambitious. So is the OFTO system up for the challenge?
Well, that's a question worth exploring. As we dig deeper into these sources, we'll get a better sense of the challenges and opportunities ahead.
Okay, sounds like we've got our work cut out for us. Let's jump right in after a quick break and see what else we can uncover.
It really is a fascinating system. On the one hand, you have billions of pounds of private investment flowing into this critical infrastructure. But on the other hand, it creates this incredibly complex and competitive environment for the companies involved.
Yeah, and looking through these sources, one thing that really stood out to me was RWE's intention to offer operations and maintenance, or O&M services, to the winning OFTO.
Right.
Just like they're saying, hey, we built this thing, we know it inside and out. Why not just let us handle all the upkeep?
It's interesting for sure, and it's not totally unprecedented either. During the Q&A session, RWE confirmed that they've offered commercial O&M services on previous projects. It seems to be part of their strategy.
Yeah, but it does raise some interesting questions. Like,
Yep.
Is it a take it or leave it kind of offer? Can bidders say, thanks, but no thanks, we'd rather handle the O&M ourselves? Or are they obligated to go with RWE?
That's a really good question, and it was one that several potential bidders were curious about during the launch event. In fact, one of them even asked, is the O&M proposal a pizza where we can pick and choose the slices we want, or is it all or nothing?
I love that analogy. Everyone understands pizza choices. So what did RWE say?
With the launch event, they said they were initially focusing on providing a complete, competitively priced O&M package. So it sounds like they were leaning towards the whole pizza approach, at least at that stage.
Okay, so from RWE's perspective, it makes sense, right? They designed and built the asset so they have this in-depth knowledge of how it all works.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
they're saying, trust us, we know how to keep this thing running smoothly.
Right, but for the bidders, wouldn't that also potentially limit their flexibility? What if a bidder already has a trusted O&M partner they prefer to work with, or what if they think they can get a better deal elsewhere?
Absolutely. It definitely creates this kind of dilemma for bidders. They have to weigh the advantages of RWE's expertise and their integrated approach against the benefits of having more flexibility and potentially lower costs.
Yeah.
That's a strategic decision they have to make.
It is a tough call. This whole conversation about RWE's O&M offer really got me thinking about the sheer complexity of these OFTO assets. We're not talking about a simple power line here. This offshore converter platform, for example, is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, the scale of it is mind-boggling.
The slides mention it weighs over 18,000 tons and is located almost 200 kilometers offshore. It's incredible, isn't it? And it's not just the size. These platforms are packed with really sophisticated equipment. High voltage, direct current converters, transformers, harmonic filters. It's like a mini power plant, but operating out in the harsh conditions of the North Sea.
Wow, so it must take a lot of specialized knowledge to operate and maintain these systems.
It absolutely does. And then you've got the onshore converter station, which has its own set of challenges, connecting to the national grid, managing the power flow, ensuring grid stability, and let's not forget those hundreds of kilometers of subsea and onshore cables.
Right, you got to inspect them, maintain them, repair them if necessary. It's a huge logistical challenge.
It is a huge undertaking. And of course, they need to do all of this while meeting strict performance standards.
Because the OFTO's revenue is directly tied to the availability of those transmission assets. If there are outages or downtime, that's going to hit their bottom line. Exactly. They're incentivized to keep everything running smoothly, which requires not just the technical expertise, but also a deep understanding of all the regulations. They have to meet Optim's performance requirements, make sure everything's safe and reliable, and comply with all those environmental regulations. It's a lot to juggle.
So with all these complexities and challenges, what are some of the things that are really keeping these potential bidders up at night during this tender round 12?
Well, one of the biggest concerns right now is the cost of capital. There's been a lot of talk about investor caution around renewables lately.
Yeah, this came up several times during the Q&A session.
It did.
And, this investor caution, it's not just about things like rising interest rates. There are also worries about supply chain bottlenecks for wind turbine components and potential changes in government subsidies. It's all adding to the uncertainty.
It is, and all of these factors make it more difficult and expensive for these OFTOs to raise the money they need. It puts a real squeeze on their profit margins.
Makes you wonder how they balance the need for a competitive bid with making sure the project is financially viable. It sounds like walking a tightrope.
It is a delicate balancing act. And then on top of that, there's the competition itself. The attendee list for the launch event reads like a who's who of the industry.
Yeah, you've got the major energy companies like Equinor and Scottish Power, and then you have those specialized firms like Frontier Power who are already managing billions of pounds worth of OFTO assets. It's a crowded field.
It is. And with so many players competing for the same prize, it can really drive down the tender revenue stream, or TRS, that the bidders are willing to accept.
So it's a race to the bottom, in a sense.
In a way. But it's not just about the price either. Bidders also need to showcase their experience, their expertise, their track record. They need to convince Ofgem that they're the right team to handle these complex assets, to manage the risks, and to deliver the project to a really high standard.
It's a high-stakes game, for sure. And then there are those even bigger things that are completely out of their control. Geopolitical factors, energy price volatility, even things like the war in Ukraine. These all factor into their risk assessments.
Absolutely. The world is a very unpredictable place right now, and these macro-level trends can have a huge impact on how these projects play out. Bidders need to be adaptable, able to hedge against those risks, and make smart decisions even when things are uncertain.
Speaking of risk, the Q&A also highlighted some concerns about insurance for those OFTO cables. These are high-value assets, so if something goes wrong, the costs can be enormous.
And ensuring you have the right insurance coverage is absolutely essential, but it's not always straightforward. The insurance market is still kind of catching up with the unique risks associated with offshore wind farms.
It's not like insuring a car or a house, right?
Right. These are specialized assets operating in a very challenging environment. Bidders need to find insurance brokers who really understand these complexities and can secure the right coverage at a reasonable price.
It's yet another layer of complexity in an already complicated world.
It is. But, this brings up an interesting point. We've been talking a lot about the big players, the RWEs and the Equinors of the world. But if you look at the attendee list, there's actually a much more diverse ecosystem at play here.
You're right. It's not just the giants. We see companies like Mott MacDonald and Fichtner who are bringing their engineering expertise to the table.
Exactly. And then you have consultants like Arup and Baringa offering their services for things like financial modeling and market analysis.
And it's not just the technical and financial aspects either. There are law firms like Pinsent Masons and Adelshaw Goddard who are helping to navigate the complex regulatory landscape.
Right, and insurance brokers like Gallagher and Howden Specialty who are busy managing all those risks. It really does take a village to make these offshore wind projects a reality.
It's like a whole ecosystem, with each player bringing their own unique skills and expertise to the table.
And for someone like you, who's clearly interested in the nuances and complexities of this world, it's worth taking a closer look at some of these lesser-known companies. They often have specialized knowledge that can be really valuable in understanding how these projects actually work.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. The more you look, the more you discover.
Exactly. That's what I love about these deep dives. You start with what seems like a pile of dry documents, and before you know it, you're uncovering this whole world of fascinating details and interconnected challenges.
It's like a detective story, but instead of solving a crime, we're unraveling the mysteries of offshore wind transmission.
That's a great way to put it.
And speaking of unraveling, there were some really intriguing questions and concerns raised in the Q&A session that I think we should explore a little further.
Yeah.
Things like the level of detail provided to bidders, the timing of due diligence, and the potential impact of this investor caution on the long-term viability of the OFTO system as a whole.
Sounds like a plan. Let's shift gears a bit and delve into some of those key questions.
All right, so we've talked about the players, the process, the challenges, but I think it's time to really get into the nitty-gritty of what these bidders are dealing with in this OFTO tender, round 12. And the Q&A summary you gave me has some real gems in it.
Oh, it does. For example, there was a question about how much information bidders actually get up front, during that invitation to tender stage, versus what they only see later on if they're chosen as the preferred bidder.
Right, because they're essentially making this huge financial commitment based on a certain amount of information, but then there's potentially more to uncover later down the line.
Exactly. And ideally, you'd want everyone to have all the information right from the start so they can make the most informed bid possible. But as Objin pointed out, a lot of these OFTO projects are still under construction during that ITT stage. It's kind of like trying to agree on a final price for a house before it's even finished being built.
So there's this inherent level of uncertainty baked into the process.
There is, but Ofgem was very clear that they wouldn't just bring some big surprise or totally new information on the preferred bidder. It's more about refining the details, confirming those initial assumptions, and making sure there are no hidden gotchas.
So bidders need to be okay with a bit of ambiguity, do their due diligence with the information they have, and maybe make some educated guesses about those remaining unknowns.
And that's where having a really strong team of experts comes in. You need financial analysts, engineers, lawyers, all working together to assess the risks, model those different scenarios, and put together a bid that's competitive, but also financially sound.
It's like putting together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing.
Huh. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And, speaking of puzzles, another question that popped up in the Q&A was about investor caution and how that might impact the whole OFTO pipeline. Someone pointed out that there have been reports of wind farm developers slowing down their spending on renewables.
Which makes sense, right? If developers are getting cold feet, it's going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry, including the OFTO space.
Yeah, for sure. Ofgem acknowledged that the pace of development is important, but they also emphasized the UK government's commitment to those ambitious clean energy goals. Especially the Contract for Difference scheme, the CFD.
Right, the CFD that's designed to provide a stable revenue stream for renewable energy projects, which helps attract investment and reduces some of the uncertainty.
Exactly. So while those developers are facing some real challenges, that stable regulatory framework and the ongoing government support for offshore wind should mean a steady flow of OFTO assets coming to market in the long term. It's about finding that balance between responding to what's happening in the market and maintaining that long-term vision.
So it's a reassurance that the UK is serious about offshore wind, even when things get a bit bumpy.
Absolutely. But even with that reassurance, there are still those financial hurdles for bidders. And the question about the impact of investor caution on the cost of capital for OFTOs was a big one.
Because if investors are nervous about renewables in general, it makes it more expensive for those OFTOs to get the financing they need to build and operate these transmission assets.
Right. And both Optum and Centris, a financial advisory firm, pointed out that the cost of equity for OFTOs tends to mirror what's happening in the broader renewables infrastructure market.
Yeah.
So those anxieties, those broader economic trends, they definitely have an impact on the OFTO world.
So it's a double whammy: rising interest rates and increased investor risk perception. It really puts pressure on those bidders to find that sweet spot, a bid that's attractive to lenders, but also competitive enough to win the tender.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. And this actually leads to another interesting question that came up. What happens after a preferred bidder is selected? What's their level of commitment at that stage, knowing that they still have to complete their final due diligence?
That's a great question, because on one hand, you're essentially saying yes to this massive project, but on the other hand, you're still digging into those details, making sure there are no major red flags.
Yeah, Ofgem acknowledged that tension. They understand that a preferred bidder wants to see a return on their investment as soon as possible, so delays can be costly. But they also emphasize that they wouldn't pressure anyone to rush through that due diligence process. They want to make sure everything is thoroughly checked and double-checked before that final handover.
So it's a balance between speed and thoroughness, right? Balancing the bidder's desire to get things moving with Ofgem's responsibility to ensure that the whole process is done properly.
And this really gets to the heart of why the OFTO system is designed the way it is. It's about attracting that private investment.
Yes.
But it's also about creating a system that's fair, transparent, and rigorous.
Because if investors don't trust the process, they're less likely to participate, right?
Exactly. That's why all of these questions about the level of information provided the timing of due diligence, the commitment level of preferred bidders. They're also important. They speak to the integrity and the long-term viability of the OFTO system itself.
And if we zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, having a robust and trustworthy OFTO process isn't just beneficial for bidders, it's ultimately good for the development of offshore wind energy as a whole.
It is. It's like a virtuous cycle. A well-functioning OFTO system attracts more investment, drives down costs, encourages innovation, and ultimately accelerates our transition to clean energy. And that benefits everyone.
It's a win for the industry, a win for the UK's energy goals, and ultimately a win for the planet.
Exactly. And events like this TR12 launch with their detailed presentations and those open Q&A sessions, they play a vital role in maintaining that transparency and building trust between Ofgem, the bidders, and the wider investment community.
It's about making sure everyone is on the same page, understanding the challenges, and ultimately working together to make offshore wind a real success story.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of awe at the sheer scale and complexity of these projects, but also a sense of optimism. You know, there are definitely hurdles to overcome, but there's also this tremendous amount of expertise, innovation, and determination focused on making offshore wind a major part of our energy future.
I completely agree. It's been a fascinating journey exploring these sources and uncovering the intricacies of the OFTO system. And for you, having taken this deep dive, you now have a much deeper understanding of how these projects come together, the financial and technical challenges involved, and the key players driving this industry forward.
You've gone from a stack of documents to a multidimensional understanding of offshore wind transmission. And that's what we aim for here on the deep dive, taking complex topics and making them accessible, insightful, and engaging.
And before we sign off, here's a final thought to ponder as you continue exploring this space. As offshore wind farms move further out to sea into even deeper waters, the challenges and costs associated with transmission, they increase exponentially. So how will the OFTO system adapt to these evolving circumstances? That's something to think about.
It certainly is, and it's a question we'll continue to explore here on the Deep Dive as we delve into the ever-evolving world of energy and infrastructure. So until next time, keep diving, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.